Welcome to the webinar, Unlock the Power of Python in Process Mining. My name is Daniel Hughes. I will be your moderator for the day. I am with mindzie. mindzie is a leader in AI-driven process mining. We have customers, users in over 158 countries around the world and have been growing quickly since 2000. Today, we have a special guest. Soren Frederiksen is the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at mindzie. He has over 20 years of experience in software development and has spent the majority of his career with machine learning, AI, and natural language processing. Soren gets some of his inspiration from Lego building blocks. I guess that's kind of a natural since he's Danish. He feels that Legos, much like software development, you start with the large standard blocks and then add specialized pieces to round out the corners and create new unique projects. Soren's going to walk through the Python and process mining. If you have questions for that, for him, please enter those in the Q&A, and we will handle those at the end of the webinar. Soren, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Daniel. Introduction, let me share my screen and let's get going. Make sure, can you see that now, Daniel?
All good.
All right. So thanks for joining, everybody. Actually excited doing this talk. It's been a while. We've been working on a Python integration and it's now been used for several months. So this is about the right time to actually show everybody what we can do. A little bit of practical stuff. This is the agenda we'll be going through. And it is a practical guide mostly. This is why PowerPoint is in this mode. So you can see everything I'll be going through. We'll also be providing the PowerPoint slides after the presentation. And the presentation is recorded also if somebody missed parts of it or wants to have the video afterwards. So again, I'll be going through practical examples. So one of the things I hope you know is a little bit about Python before, but we'll also be showing some things where your Python skills don't have to be stellar because we've added large language model into the mix as well. So thanks for the intro, Daniel. And yeah, you're right. I take a lot of inspiration from Lego, both from playing with it as a kid, but also as one of the stellar companies in the world. And this is one of the things we keep saying, that we built our product as a Jupyter notebook using Legos. And obviously we don't use Legos. It's kind of a metaphor where we think a lot of the things to simplify process mining could be done with very simple blocks. There was just a question on something. All right, let me go. So you can do a lot of things with very, very simple blocks in here. And one of the problems with no code, so we are a no-code platform. Sorry, let me go there. Got confused a little bit. We are a no-code platform that builds everything up with very simple blocks. And stacking blocks together can do 95 to 99% of everything you want. If you're a no-code platform, one of the things in the upper limits is you can run into things where there are problems you can't solve, right? When you are a no-code platform, you give up full flexibility for simplicity. Right? That's the trade-off. So by introducing Python now at this stage, where all our base blocks are really mature, we can now add we can remove the upper limit, the glass ceiling, so forth. So, and let you do anything in Python. So hopefully you can do most of your stuff with our regular blocks, and then on occasion you will jump into coding if you want to do something very specialized that we're not going to put straight in the product. So a little bit about the Python environment that we're going to work on. So the Python Integration is currently available. If you are a SaaS client, you'll see it immediately. If you are an on-premise client, you need to just upgrade to the latest version, do some extra installs. And in our SaaS environment, this is the Python version we work with and the installs that we've done on the Python environment. If you're a desktop client, it currently is not working on desktop. There are a lot of desktop users that would like to have it. Please request it. It is possible. It's just some setup with it. So currently, we just don't support it on desktop. The other thing is also if you are a SaaS customer in our current production environment, you can get extra pip installed. Again, reach out to us and we can help you with that. Not on the free version, but on the paid enterprise version, you can get extra libraries in. So another thing we're introducing today is actually our Python Copilot. And Python Copilot will allow you to do all of these kind of 4 things mainly. So this is using a large language model where code writing has gotten really, really good in these models. We've trained it to be specialized in the pieces of code that we needed to write for Python. And so some of the things you can do is you can write code, you can improve code. So if you have some existing Python, you can provide it with Python code and get it to improve it. One of the things I actually love about it too is once you start having a lot of these Python snippets written in your code and you come back to it 3 to 6 months, can't remember what it did, you might not have fully documented everything, you can actually then get it to explain your code to you. And then you can also just ask for help. You can ask for help on what you can do in our platform. So those are some of the things we'll be showing you throughout. Just a little bit of architecture, and we'll get into the actual demonstration soon. This is the architecture of our data structure, kind of how it flows through our product at a higher level. And when you see data coming in, and why this is important is you need to see kind of where we're doing Python in different areas. So data can come in multiple different ways. You can manually upload it. You can use some of our designer tools, so it come from third party, and then it gets pushed into a data set or an event log if you prefer that name of it. We always work on enriched data sets. So as soon as you get a data set coming in, we enrich it, and basically we can add attributes, and it's very much what we're going to go through today, to have an enriched data set. And you can have multiple enriched data sets off of one. So this is where we've added Python. So now you'll be able to take a data set and manipulate it and get different outputs using Python. The other place we've added Python, which we also talk about, is on the way out. So once you've found insights in the analysis, you can write Python to send data out. All your insights you can send to different places. So these are the 2 areas where Python's been added. To talk a little bit about our enrichment, it's there's a vast library of blocks where you can do enrichments, and some of the things are just mentioned here. Some of the things we do often are mentioned in our recommended tab when you go onto our enrichments. So duration between activities is something we often calculate. What's the time from between the invoice was entered to the invoice was paid? It's not the whole case duration, so it'd be nice to have a case attribute for that. And then you can see these other things that we can do out of the box. There's quite a few of them. But we have had questions where there were things that you wanted to do some specialized things, and that's where this Python integration now has been added. We've said it a couple of times in our product, we're an opinionated product. So, and what that means is we don't want to just give you Python integration. We want to give you a very clear way of how to also do your Python integration. When you do enrichment, when you change your log, and the reason to do it at this level instead of doing it when you extract the log is, first of all, when you're at this level, you have better context, right? You have cases and events at this point that you can do a lot of manipulation with. When you're doing database extraction, you typically extract a piece at a time. So there's a lot of things that are easier to do here. The programming language is better, unless, of course, you use Python for your extractions. So you can get a much richer experience doing enrichment after your extraction. So, and also, if you keep your extractions simple, they're a lot easier to maintain. These are the things you can do in enrichment. You can add attributes. You can edit attributes, add events, remove cases or events, and we'll be going through all of these in just a second. So finally, let me jump into actually showing some of how this is done. And these slides will be provided. So all of this, you can kind of see the step that we go through and actually see the code for this as well. So created a little dashboard in our system, has really nothing to do with Python, but it's just a good way for me to collect all of this stuff on our own Python, on our own dashboards. The enrichment screen you go to, and I don't want to go through all of this, so I hope you have some familiarity with using our enrichments. The enrichment now has a new block you can add called Python, and once you add that, it has a few settings that I'll be going through one at a time. So this is what comes up, and what we do ask you for, just a little bit of background, is we ask you for the columns you want to work on. So one of the things we don't want to just give you the whole log in Python and manipulate it. It's a time constraint. It's much faster. Just say what I want to do right now only needs a couple of the columns in my data set. So you specify the columns. Then if you change some columns and you want us to update the data back after the Python, you just have to tell us which ones those are. And then here you can add new columns as well. So on this first one, we want to add a new column called parity status. And all of my examples, you'll see most of them are pretty simple, and that's because I don't want to make the Python difficult. Hopefully you can abstract from that and see that the Python could be a lot more difficult than this. So this, what it does is well, we can actually see it. You can actually see this is the comment on it, and now this is the copilot that we've added on. So on the side of your Python, you will have this copilot that you can talk to and ask all kinds of things. If I didn't know how to write this Python, right? I've been writing code for about 30 years. Still, sometimes you can't remember all the expressions out of a data frame. So you can actually just go and ask this, and I believe this was probably written this way as well, is you just take your question and you paste it into the chatbot, and it will actually generate the code for it. This Copilot have been instructed to mainly generate code. That's why you're asking it stuff. And here you can see that it generated the code, and it does also give some description of it. You can also say, if you don't remember, this was the other part, right? You can just say, explain this. And it will go the other way around. So it can take the code and explain what it does. So what this code does is it takes just the last case ID character, and it creates a new attribute called parity status. So it's setting up a new attribute. It's using some data from your log, and it's setting the values in that parity status. And here it describes what it actually does. And what that does is I won't be running all of these, but here this will actually be creating an odd or an even, right? Just so you can see that it's actually doing things. Let's actually just go change it. So let's just call it even 2, just to make a small change. And then we run this. So after you set up your enrichment, you calculate your enrichments. This is typically done once when you're either doing your initial setup or as data comes in on a daily basis, or however often you update your data set. If you manually upload your data, we automatically rerun your enrichments. Doing enrichments instead of doing this dynamic calculations also speeds everything up. Okay? So now we should have the parity status now is odd and even 2. So this is how you can go change it. I'm just going to go change this back so I don't get in trouble with that next time. And then when we run the enrichment next time, this will be back. So this was adding an attribute. And the reason I keep all of these here is actually so you can kind of keep following along and seeing what we're doing, and you will get this so you could try this yourself. So the other thing about, let's try to add an event attribute. And what's the difference, right? What's the difference between event and case? Hopefully, see here now came up with a warning because it removed my name event, became event 2. So let's actually just go fix that because let's go set that back so it doesn't show a warning all the time when we're doing this. So I just had to run the enrichment again and get my name back to even. So difference obviously between a case and event attribute, I hope you know. And there's some subtle differences when you change log, because Cases are easy to identify. They have a case identifier. Activities do not. So it's important that you can change and manipulate both of those. Now that we go back to our dashboard, this has been fixed again because I was looking for even in this one. So let's go on just the event attribute. I'll try to move a little bit quicker. So here we've actually, when you do enrichments, you can do multiple enrichment in one. In most of our example, I've split them out, so it's easier to navigate and find what I've done. And here I have 2 enrichments I've done both in Python. The first one here is fairly simple. I'm just taking the activity name and I'm using the length of the activity name to create a new event attribute saying activity length. Maybe not the most important, but it could be interesting for some kind of, actually some clustering, but it is more to show the code. And this again, I don't think it's needed to run it here, but here you can see it now created, oh, it didn't yet, so I will actually run it. Sorry, it did create it there, sorry, it did. And then the other thing is we also had a cleanup currency. So we had some currencies in here that, if we go look at the currency attribute, they were named. They weren't just the abbreviations of the currency. So here we've created another script where it basically just takes the currency and replaces the Mexican peso with the currency symbol for Mexican pesos. And again, these were all written using the Copilot. So that was adding an event attribute. Just changing an event attribute is just a little bit different, and it's not a lot different, but a couple of things we've done for this is, again, make sure that try to minimize the number of mistakes that you can do. And this was the Mexican pesos I showed, but I forgot to show one thing you can do with it. When you want to change something, you want to set the value back. You have to say, you have to tell us which columns you're working on, but then you also have to say which columns you're changing. Once we give you the data into Python and you write some scripts, we just want to make sure that you're not changing columns in this data set to make some temporary calculations. So when you want to change currency, you also have to tell us that you're changing the currency. And it's really just to protect against us not updating some data you didn't want to change. And then again, just the code here. So you don't have to do anything. You just like change the currency, but you do have to tell us that the currency is changing. So that means you can take existing attributes and just clean up the values. We do this a lot from just simple text replacements, but also you can change values, outliers you can remove or make shorter or smaller. And there are some samples of this later. So the other thing we do fairly often is actually inject events, right? If you've got an extraction, you might not have control over your extractions. You might want to inject an event where there was a case attribute value. And so for this example, and I can actually link directly into a lot of these things as well. So I can jump directly to where we're going. So here we're taking we have a cash discount date. And we want to inject an activity in, which you can see this has already been run, and saying added discount activity. So this is basically describing when the activity happened. And that means when we see the log, we can see this now on the process map instead. This you could do on an extraction time, but if you didn't do it here, you can also inject them. And now the Python is getting a little more complicated. First of all, I asked for the activity name and the discount date. These are the 2 things I need to work on. And then now I can write the Python, which I won't go through. I basically loop over them, and you can then find the discount dates, and then you can start setting. And here you just basically add events to the event table. Maybe this is one thing I didn't mention yet is how kind of all this works as well. So when you ask us for these values, and you go to your Python, you can see out here there's a little show input data. What we provide to you available in your Python data before the kind of your Python data runs are these things that you asked for. So we always split things into the case table and into an event table. These are the two. And the case table will always have a case ID. The event table will always have an internal ID, case ID, activity name, and activity time. So these you're handed, this we take care of. So your Python, when it runs, already does this, and you can now manipulate on it. If you add things to the event table, we will add the events back in. If you delete things from the event table, we'll do the same. We'll remove the event from the table when it comes back. So this is actually how it works, and we'll show a little bit more detail when we write code offline for this. Well, let's try see another example how to remove cases. Here we just want to remove anything with the vendor of C. I'll show you. You can remove cases. You can also flag cases and then remove them later. So there's different ways you can do this. Here we're just showing you that you can just remove a case from your data. So let's go back in and just see the code for this. So you select the vendor, and so anything vendor that starts with the C, you basically remove the table. So this code is fairly trivial. You have a case table, take the one that starts with the C and you remove them from the case table. What we do when this data comes back to us is we will make sure to merge that with your log. And maybe trust me on that one, but if you look at it here, there used to be vendors with the C, they're now all gone. Let's take a couple more. Removing events is the same, and removing events is a little tricky because if you know you can have multiple events that have the same activity name and activity time, it's totally valid because the event values, the event attributes could be different. Things can happen at the same time, same event. It is often something we clean up, but it is possible. So removing event is a little bit more tricky than doing cases, but you don't really have to worry about that. All you have to do is just remove your data from the event table that you have. So let's go look at that code, and I'll show you a couple of things on here. So this code was not written actually by Copilot. This was written before somebody from our company wrote this, and it has multiple steps, and there were some errors in it. So he actually wrote some print statements to get the values out as he was going along. And you can kind of see that it's fairly simple. He took the original number of events, printed, and then just saved that, and then he just printed out. Here he printed out the count of the event table afterwards, and he said, this is how many I want to delete. So if we now run this enrichment here, what happens is that when you print anything to the standard output of a Python script, we capture it and we can then display you later. We have all of this is running as part of a pipeline that you see, and we have a pipeline queue, and you can see how often you've run this. You can see I've run this multiple times. And here, there's a little output where you can actually see the output of your scripts. So as you're debugging, one way you can do this is actually just do print screens. Print different things out that happen in your script, saying this is the original event table, it's how many I'm deleting, and this is now what I have left, right? So there's a number of events I have left in there. So 144,369. And if we go look at actually our data, that is what we see that's left in the data after it runs. So the standard output is something that's really useful. The queue is useful after you have run. And here it will also show potential errors. You will, of course, write some errors into your Python script so you can see the errors on that screen as well if they happen, and use them to troubleshoot. To now try to go into a little bit more difficult or a little bit more advanced script, like I want to try to show an example we were just actually faced with recently. We got some data from a client, and I can run to the analysis. And this is a sample data set of something similar, where there's a log that has a lot of update invoice statements, and this is coming from a NetSuite sample data. And in NetSuite, one of the things they do is they have these system tables that track every single field. So when you have updates, you can have multiple fields updating at the same time. And there's multiple ways you can fix this in extraction, but here it wasn't, and there wasn't really a possibility to change the extraction for this. So one of the things that would be nice to do is actually collapse all of these values. Here they're exactly the same second, but it wasn't always the case. It could actually be that some of these happen at 9, 10, and there were like 4 or 5 seconds in between these. So we wanted to collapse everything that happened, and I think here we say within a minute. So that's a perfect thing to do as a cleanup stage in a Python script now. And here, all I need to do this is the activity name. I will automatically get the activity time and the case ID with it. Remember when I showed this here, this is what I'm actually getting out. And this is now a little bit more complicated. It basically runs over the event table. It takes the time difference from any previous ones. It sorts it first. And then it basically collapses and only keeps the one event, the first one in the row. So, and one of the things you can see is a little trick we've done here also. If you want to run any of this without having all the Python script run, you can basically just exit the Python script. The enrichment will still run, and you can get the enrichment without Python. So we've done this quite often. And one of the things I want to show, because now this is getting more complicated, right? So running code in our environment is obviously not the best solution. It wouldn't be a good experience to write code here, run this, wait for the pipeline to finish, and then see the errors. So one of the things you can do here is you can actually take this and you can download this whole. Let me just make sure that all my things are deleted. And then you can download a package onto your computer. Now I'll show what this package does. And then you can unzip this. Let's look into the package. So this is Python script, and there's an in directory. And this is where we will put that event table that I showed in the log. So when you go look at this here, you're basically getting the event table out, all of these values. So whatever you ask for, and there might be an event table and or a case table in here. And we also give you some schema information because in our language, it's very important to maintain type. Python is not a type library, so it doesn't maintain type. So it's important for us to do that. And let me then show what you can do. You can open Visual Code or any other Python editor you have. So whatever you're used to in Python, you can run this in. And then what I do in Visual Code is usually just open the folder we just downloaded. And you will have the in directory that we had, and you'll have the script. And now the script, we've added a little bit more, so it looks the same as when you're in your environment. And all of this stuff is stuff we inject in to kind of help you out. The stuff that is your own code comes further down, right in between this here, where it says user script starts, and then down here, user script ends. So all of this is your own code, and you can debug it here. You can change values, and you can actually run it. And so here it just said, if I run this code in the engine, I would remove 21 events. So here you can go and change, and you can debug your code. And then when you're ready, all you do is you just take this piece in between here. Where was it there? And then you copy that back into the environment. So this is typically how we work, because you don't want to work in ours. There's a lot of better editors than currently that is in our system. There's a lot better ways to debug here. It has IntelliSense built in and so forth. So, and it's the whole package of all your data that you ask for, you will have downloaded. So it is a fully capable way of developing. It's also a quick way if you want to get some data that you want to play with and not even maybe create an enrichment, you can use this to write some test code to manipulate your data. So if we go back now, and because here actually, you remember we had all these extra updates in the example I showed, where they were happening at the same time. So after running this script now, what it does is it deletes the correct events and only keeps one for like it was 9, 10 in the morning. It's going to have only one left. So now when I go back and I look at my data, I only have the one 9, 10, it took out all the other ones. So that kind of code is a little bit more, starting to be a little bit more advanced than just setting attribute values. And the good thing about it is doing it offline makes it so much easier to debug through it. And again, you'll have the code here. So you can, if you want to actually look at, I don't think the code is important, but at least you can kind of see how you do some of that. It's always good to have examples to say, I want to remove activities or I want to remove events. This is how we did it. Not necessarily, I don't want to remove it in this way, but at least this is how it was done. The next one is now an outlier. So this is actually a problem that I remember from one of my early days of doing process mining, looking at the 2009 BPI challenge. Maybe some of you have tried that, but when you look at it, you can already see it here. It has some massive outliers in the data. And I just thought this was kind of an interesting example to show. In Mindset Studio, it would be easy just to filter around these dates. Right? It's not difficult. But let's say this was part of an automated process. So what I want to do here is I want to see what are the outliers. And here, I don't want to remove them, because what I want to do is I want to see the data that's out here to maybe figure out what happened. Right? So what I want to do is actually create an attribute that tells me on every single of these events which ones are the outliers. And Python has a lot of outlier libraries and a lot of things you can do for that. So let me go look at some other ways. I did 2 different examples to also show you can do multiple things here. And what these do is they're not going to, again, delete. They're really just going to create 2 attributes here. One is called month count too low, and one is called time outlier. Right? And they will be set. So the way the date outlier one, this was the first one I tried just to try some Python code, and this was actually written with Copilot. And if I go back and just to kind of actually show you, this was the prompt that was actually used to write that, and I believe it wasn't actually modified at all. So here, what it does is it just takes the interquartile range, and it uses that to basically find out where the outliers, and then it marks the events, the time outlier value to true or false, whether or not they're inside or outside the range that it finds in the times of the log. So this is something that's often used for doing outlier detection. And I've already run this, so it means that it said that there's 82 outliers in this data set. And what we can do now is we can go back into our analysis and just say, down here I've created a simple filter where I just say, if the time outlier is false, that means they're not an outlier, then show it, right? So if I drag that up in front of the map, or sorry, the chart, you can see that it's now better. It's not great, right? It still has a bunch of outliers here. So the quantile, we could change it, maybe increase the number, and maybe it'll cut some of these off. The other thing I want to do is I want to try a different method as well. Let's just see if we can do something else. And one of the things also, just to show how we can write different code, is if you look at this, there's some month that don't have any count, right? So there's very little count for most of the month. There's only a few dates way out here. So the other enrichment was done, and it's also actually in the PowerPoint here. Let me show you. Here is actually a bit more advanced prompt that you can use. So if I go in here, I'll actually just show it. So I thought this is kind of interesting. You can start writing quite a bit more advanced prompts to these this model. And one of the things it did is say, just please remove temporary columns after it was created. And so this was actually a 2-stage prompt, because it didn't delete, it created temporary columns. We have a problem with that merging our data back, so make sure that they're removed. So it will actually also write the script. And if you look down at the bottom, what it did last time is it actually removed the temporary column again. It creates a column called year month. Here is it hopefully fairly close to what it was before. One of the things to note when you use large language model is don't ever just copy and paste this in and use it as is. Hopefully you know enough about Python to at least validate this code. But it is strikingly good. It is, I would say, 95% of the time you have to change very little when you ask it for things that are this small. But make sure you validate the code when you paste it in. So here it just basically creates a year, month attribute. It then calculates the min and max values, and then it basically just says what's the first time there's 100 count in the case, and what's the last time that there was 100 count in it, and then it takes values in between that range. So if we go back and look at that algorithm instead, which is a fairly trivial algorithm to write, and we move that up, it is a much better automated system. The problem is it doesn't work out here because there are cases that actually kind of linger that closed after the fact. So instead of using activity time, we could use case times and cut out on that, but I left it at this to show. So hopefully this just shows a bit more advanced algorithm you can do with enriched attributes. And the good thing about this is now I can also go in and filter. I can actually see if I want to, I can change the filter on this and saying, show me all the places where the attributes are true. And now I only get the outliers, right? So now I can use this data set to kind of, I want to analyze my outliers and see what happened here, right? Why are there all these things in 2015? Is it an error or is it certain cases with that? So you can do the filtering in the Python enrichment or in our normal enrichment, but you can also just flag things so you can analyze them in two different groups later on. I think I need to move a little bit quicker, but I think we'll still have some time for questions and answers. So the second step, and we won't take as long in this is more of a concept of what you can do. Our actions is a different part of mindzie, and you can basically take any of your analysis output from anywhere in mindzie Studio and send them anywhere else that Python can handle. So here we're showing some examples, really not important. You'll just see you can get at all this data. So you can use it to notify people, take action. You can also export the whole event log automatically if you want and send it somewhere else. And again, to remember the architecture, we're now over here where you've done all the analysis. You've taken some of this analysis out, and we're now sending it out to somewhere else. And these can actually be triggered on timers, or they can actually be triggered outside from an API. So you can set something up and pull this into other systems if you're interested in doing that. When you set up actions, you have to set up 4 things, and I'll go through it. You have to set up a name, you have to select the data you want to send out, then you select and configure an action, and then you set up the triggers. And let's actually just go do that instead. I've set up 2 actions here, and purposely there was an error in one of them, but here it can actually send some payment data into Power BI. Right, so we can send data directly over to Power BI, and the way that looks, first I'm just going to go show the code for that. This is actually the code to send to Power BI. I'm not showing you all my IDs and stuff, but this is fairly trivial to take data, and part of it that's kind of ours is this is where we have some data that we load into from an analysis and we send it over. So that's one of the steps that's actually done to send it into Power BI. The data we're using, just to also show that, is actually the output from one analysis. So we have an analysis that we set up where, just to show some of the steps, we used our enrichment algorithm that can categorize. So this was not Python. It categorized things in fast, normal, slow, and extremely slow cases. We selected all the extremely slow and said, these are all the vendors where the case duration are long. This is what we showed. And this is probably something that would be interesting to send out on a monthly basis, weekly basis, saying these payments are slow and these are the vendors that are affected by this. So we want to take this field here, this whole table, and send it out. And that's what that little Python snippet did. The other thing we want to do as well, so here was actually the performance you set up, and just to show some of that performance in mindzie is really easy to do, that you just divide it up. So here's things where we don't have to do the Python code, right? This can be written in Python code, but there's no need to. We're pretty easy to classify durations. So if I go back to the action and saying, so that was the one action for the payments. Let me show the ones that actually are used for sending to teams. So what the scenario shows is you have some slow vendors payments. You send that to Power BI because that's where your normal users digest their data. You then also say, if it is above this value, I also want to send a team message. I want somebody to deal with this right away. I don't want anybody to wait for this. So let me show you how that works. So when you set up an action, let's take that through. You give it a name. You then go in and select the data. And here you can go in and select any analysis you have in your system. I just selected the one here called slow vendor payments. Once you do that, then you have multiple action steps. Some of the things we do out of the box are email. You can send that whole grid as an email. So if you just want to send it an email, you don't need to write any code. And the Python script is now the thing that's been added where you can now take the data that we hand to you from those analysis and write Python for them. And this script I'll actually show working. Here you can see this is just how you send a message to team. So it's a fairly small method actually to send messages, small method to send messages into teams. And down below are all my secrets that I'm not showing. And here you can just basically see there's some URL going into mindzie and into Power BI. Also this, to show how this works, because we're not going to go into depth on this, is once you run this, it will also have a package for what we handed you. So all the analysis that we gave you are now also sitting in a package that you can download. And you can go to the history of this, and then you can download that whole package and work with this offline as well. Typically, these integration will be bigger than enrichment, right? You might be calling multiple things. All these triggers, you can also trigger multiple stages, so you can make it part of a workflow. And so here you can see a lot of data we give you. We give you all the analysis you ask for, a bunch of numbers. And so this is all the data, right? And you can actually, there's a way to figure out the structure of all this. There's a JSON document that explains all of it if you want to dive into more detail. The better part, though, is you can also just go back into your Python environment, and I'll show you how. Let's close this folder and open up a new one. Just show how you work with this offline, because this is probably something you'd be doing often, right? You'd be downloading this package, and the way you do this normally, all right, I'm selecting the wrong one. The way you do this is you run it once with no Python code, and it generates the package, and then you download it, and then you can write this again. You just write it down here at the bottom. And here is the code to run. And if I run that from here as well, it actually does everything that you would be doing on our servers. You just do it offline. And you can now see here that let me bring over my Teams. It send a message in. So this was done right now. And it has some links that I put in. It's just fairly easy to do in Teams. And here I can now go directly to Power BI. Right, so there was a problem happened, send it to a manager. Here's your dashboard set up with data pushed in from Mindzie Studio. And the other thing we can do is we can also set a link back. So let's say this has some information you're interested in. And then if you want more detail, you could be sent back to Mindzie Studio, where you just get taken straight to the analysis we wanted. And here you can now open the biggest culprit. And you can go in and you can drill down into the cases and see what's going on. So that's kind of a whole way of integrating and using actions to send data out to somewhere else and make Mindzie Studio kind of part of a workflow. And the last thing we didn't show, but you can set up the triggers here. I have not set up one for this because it's not running daily. You can set up scheduled triggers on this, and you can also trigger these actions from an API outside. So either you run this every morning, you run it every Monday morning to give output vendors a message and also set this up, or you actually trigger it from another system. And then it kind of goes through that action workflow. So I think that was all of my slides and went all the way through. I made it in about 45 minutes, so I think we should open up for questions.
Thanks, Soren. Looks like we have a lot of questions here in the chat. We'll be able to take a few of them before we have to hop offline today. Let me get one of these here. 1 second. So here's a question. What versions is Python supported in?
Yeah, so it's Python 3.11 current. So there's two different modes. Let me go back because I had it on the screen earlier. Where was the environment? Python, no. Where did I put it? There. So these are the numbers kind of on Python. So on SaaS, we use Python 3.11, and these other libraries are in these versions. In SaaS, if you are an enterprise customer, paying customer in SaaS, we can change this. We run Docker behind the scenes to make all this safe. We can set up other Docker versions. We just do them on a request basis. We can set up specialized Docker instances for special customers. If you're doing this on premise, if you do this on premise, this is totally up to you. We provide this Docker container for you, and then we work with you on creating other Docker containers to do this in other versions. So essentially, we support any version you can run on a Windows. We run Windows Docker containers to do this. So hopefully that answers the question.
Excellent. Another question about the environments. What type of environments does mindzie support? SaaS, cloud, on-premise, desktop, etc.
So it's fully supported on SaaS and on-premise. Currently, it's not supported on desktop. Unless we get a lot of requests from desktop users, and then we might add that in. We can add it in. It's just we have to do a little bit more.
Sounds good. A few questions around actions. So, what systems are supported for the actions? Are there any systems that actions can't be used on?
No. So again, actions are not. You can't use actions in desktop, mainly because actions are something where you run daily, and desktop is not set up to be part of a pipeline. So in SaaS and on-premise, both work. All of the features in action I showed work equally well in SaaS and on-premise. And which systems are supported? Maybe if I understand it right, you can write to anything in Python you want, right? We give you the request library as part of our library. So if you have a REST API that you can call any REST API anywhere. We don't limit firewalls in the SaaS version. The only thing we limit on our is how long it takes. Right? We don't want you running for 3 hours on our servers running Python scripts. We do limit the time, but you can send things to anywhere. So there's really no limitations on what the actions can send to. Not sure if that, maybe do a follow-up questions if I didn't answer that correctly.
No, I think that's perfect. And then one question about training. We do have a full training environment at training.mindzie.com. But the question was, do we have any Python examples in our training platform?
No, they're not there yet. That's why we'll make this PowerPoint, and this is kind of why I've kept it here, so you can kind of jump back and forth and see this. This will show examples of everything you'd want to do, not the actual Python, right? The Python we were hoping you know yourself, but how to remove, add, and do all the steps I went through. So that will be coming in this one, and I believe we'll be putting some of this up on the training as well, just to know when. So you'll get this sent to you in an email.
Excellent. Seems like we're coming here to the top of the hour, so we'll wrap it up there. All the other questions that are in the Q&A, we'll answer those offline. But just so everybody knows, the webinar was recorded. You will get a link to the replay and a copy of the slides. And then out later, it will be available on our YouTube channel. So you can follow mindzie on YouTube and look at all of our previous webinars, including this one as well. Soren, thanks so much for the presentation today. You even got some applause. I like that. Thumbs up.
Thanks for attending, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll wrap it up for there. Thanks everybody for attending. Reach out if you have any questions.
The webinar has ended. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.